Welcome back, everybody, to session 4 on policy, effective programs, best practices, and effectiveness in assessment. My name is Preston Peck. I'm with City of Tacoma Solid Waste Management. I will be moderating the session today, and we have a wonderful panel lined up to talk about a lot of different policy initiatives going on as it relates to litter, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody. So without delay, we'll go ahead and get started. Our first speakers up will be Afale and Bethany Drahota of Cascadia Consulting Group, who will talk about the 2022 Washington State Litter Study. So and Bethany, if you're ready.
Yes, I will share my screen. Thank you, Preston.
No problem. And all of our speakers will have about 12 to 15 minutes to present with a little Q&A afterwards. So I'll jump in there, but I'm sure you're all professionals and have it timed perfectly.
Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome all. My name is Bethany Drahota, and I'm a research associate with Cascadia Consulting Group. And I'll be presenting today with my colleague Omkar Afale. And today we're going to talk to you about the 2022 Washington statewide litter study that we've been working on. So we'll go over a little bit of the project background, the sampling methodology, the initial or preliminary results, and some next steps coming up. All right. The goal of this study was to determine the approximate state of litter across Washington. To do that, we looked at roadways, interchanges, and public places across the state. The study was done on behalf of the Washington Department of Ecology and is a continuation of past litter studies, as well as a build-off of a more recent KAB or Keep America Beautiful study. We looked at 182 sampling sites across the state, and we looked at two sampling types at each site for a total of 364 samples, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in a moment. There were 104 roadway sites, which you can see on this map, marked by the upside-down teardrop, and those included interstate roads, arterial roads, collector roads, and local roads. There were 26 interchanges, which are marked on this map with a plus sign or a cross, and there were 52 public places marked by a flag, which included rest areas, recreation areas, and public places or public parks. In addition to looking at different site types, we also looked at whether these site locations were in rural or urban areas. And so, for example, we split our sites in half, where a roadway would have 50% of those roadway sites are urban and 50% of those roadway sites are rural. The majority of sites fell along main highway corridors and spread out from there. And this approach allowed us to cover as much ground as possible for a comprehensive study. As mentioned, we looked at 2 different samples per site for a total of 364 samples. And what this looked like is one full sampling area that was 4,500 square feet, or about 15 by 300 feet rectangle, with a sub-sampling area within that footprint that was a 15 by 15 foot square. So for example, just try and think about a long rectangle as the full sampling area. And on the far left end of that rectangle, there's a square that's about 225 square feet. And that's where our subsamples took place. And after we established our site, we put down a sign requesting that litter not be picked up from this area. And that sign will remain for the entire 5 months between our first and second sampling period, which will happen in October. Full sites were cleaned down to a minimum size threshold of 4 inches. So anything above 4 inches was collected and taken back to our sort locations. And sub-sites were collected or cleaned of litter between 1 inch and 4 inch in size, and also included any cigarette butts that were visible to the naked eye. This plus or minus threshold was used in the KAB study as well, so we adopted this for consistency. After sites were cleaned, the samples were bagged and taken back to a central sort location in Shoreline, Washington. Samples were dropped off in intervals to allow our sort crew to get started on sorting while samples were still being collected out in the field. And this is a picture of some of the samples that were brought in, certainly not all. We had a lot of bags happening in that room. Our crews both sorted and counted and weighed all of the samples that came in. To the left, you can see our crew sorting the full samples or the larger samples in the parking lot. And to the right is our crew sorting the smaller, more meticulous subsamples all into baskets. To sort materials, we used a category list that was 94 materials long and was based off of multiple studies. We pulled from past Washington Department of Ecology study lists, as well as the more recent KAB list, as well as the Escaped Trash Assessment Protocol, or ETAP list, to form one cohesive list that we could then use to make the study comparable to other studies. And now Omkar is going to jump into some of our preliminary findings.
Thank you, Bethany, for that introduction and overview of the methodology. Hello, everyone. My name is Omkar Afre, a senior associate here at Cascadia Consulting. And I'll be talking about some of the findings that we computed based on our preliminary analysis of the data that we collected during the spring fieldwork event. I emphasize the word preliminary because we have still one more leg of fieldwork, as Bethany pointed out, and after which we'll dive deeper into the analysis. So during the spring fieldwork event, our sampling crews sampled approximately 2,045 pounds, or approximately a ton of litter, and they also equivalently counted around 25,000 litter items during the sorting period. We took the sampling areas and scaled them up to an acre. And so on average, we sampled about 68.3 pounds of litter per acre, or approximately 13,219 litter items per acre. Next slide, please. Now we look at the results by different site types. The first site type is the roadways. And this graph shows a two-sided average weight of sample litter expressed as pounds per mile. As Bethany pointed out, we split our roadways into 8 different subtypes, so urban and rural, and then within that we have interstate, arterial, collector, and local roads. As the graph points out, most litter was found on urban interstate sites, and in general, we found like more litter on like urban areas compared to rural roadways. Next slide, please. The picture remains consistent when we express the results in terms of counts. So here is a graph that shows the two-sided average count of sample litter expressed as number of litter items per mile. And from left to right, as you can see, like urban interstate sites, we found most litter on those sites. And generally, the urban roads were more littered than rural or any other type of roads. Next slide, please. Moving on to the next site type are the interchanges. And so these are like typically your on-ramps or off-ramps along the interchanges. We express the results in terms of like pounds per acre, since this is like an area where we sampled. The blue graph shows results by weight. The green graph shows results by count. And in both graphs, as you can see, urban interchanges, we found most litter or more litter compared to on rural interchanges. Next slide, please. Moving on to the public places, where, as Bethany pointed out, we sampled at parks, rest areas, and other recreational areas. Again, the blue graph to the left shows the average weight, and the green graph shows the average counts. And in both graphs, as you can see, the middle column, which is the rest areas, we found most litter at these sites compared to other sites that we sampled. Next slide, please. After that, we looked at what are the top items that we found both by weight and by count in our full and subsamples. So this slide shows the top 5 materials by weight. The top row is full samples, the bottom row is subsamples. Again, these are preliminary results based on unweighted analysis. But what we find in like full samples, items like vehicle debris, C&D or construction demolition, tires and textiles, items tend to be like heavier, form the top 5. And in the subsamples, we found C&D items that could not be identified in any particular category, so they were lumped into miscellaneous. Auto rubber products such as tire treads were found in among the top 5 for the subsamples by weight. Next slide, please. This slide shows the top 5 items for full and subsamples by count. So the previous was weight, this is counts. The top row is the full samples, and we found items such as other plastic film, food wrappers, auto rubber products, vehicle debris, and other type of miscellaneous plastic forming the top 5 for the full samples. And then for the subsamples, we found items such as cigarette butts, small pieces of other plastic film, or other rigid plastics, food wrappers, and auto rubber products forming the top 5 for the subsamples that we sampled. Next slide, please. In addition to weighing and counting the materials, our sampling crews also documented items that we could not pick up that were considered too heavy or too bulky, like a couch, or items that were considered hazardous, such as containers filled with urine or body fluids, razors, explosives, things like that. We are going to be documenting these separately in our report, but we did document this while we were sampling in these sampling areas. Next slide, please. After that, we looked at the preliminary findings to see what all different materials we found that are part of the current litter tax list. And we find items such as cigarette and tobacco products, beer bottles, rigid and film plastics, mixed paper, and metal and glass containers. So there's some overlap with the current litter tax list. Based on the preliminary data, if we were to stick our neck out and say that one item that we don't find here is the construction demolition debris that we found in terms of weight in our top 5 list. So there's one item that potentially is not in the current list. I believe I would hand it back to Bethany.
Yes, thank you for that, Omkar. And our next steps here are going to be getting ready for our second season of fieldwork coming in October. We'll be sampling at the exact same sites all across the state, and we'll be sorting and counting again like we did in the first season in May. And then we'll dive into our analysis and reporting and expect a full report out in March of next year. And here's just a look at some of the friendly faces and critters that joined us on our sampling this round. We found several snakes. There was a scorpion no one got a picture of, but it was a great time out there. And thank you very much for your time and attention, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments.
Great. Thank you, Omkar and Bethany. Much appreciated and very interesting to go through the findings. I wanted to remind everybody watching too and participating that you can find more information about all of our speakers in today's panel. There's a link in the chat from Morgan, so feel free to click on that link and you will find out more about all of our wonderful speakers today. Next up, I would like to invite Christy Day from Kitsap County to discuss leveraging community engagement for data solutions. Christy, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Preston.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Day, an Education and Outreach Coordinator with Kitsap County. Today, I'll talk about how we have been leveraging community engagement for data collection in our volunteer litter cleanup program. We launched our revitalized program, rebranded as Adopt-A-Spot, in April of this year. You can use this QR code to access our public site if you'd like a closer look as we go along. We used several main ArcGIS applications to encourage engagement, collect and visualize data, and provide transparency to the public. These included the HubSite app for website creation, Survey123, which is a simple online form, and the Experience app. There's one for public viewing and one for internal management of data. So, why did we do this? I was hired in late 2020 when most volunteer work and gatherings had been suspended. The former Adopt a Road program had seen a decline in activity from COVID pauses, and now there was a natural decline in litter pickup due to the seasons changing. COVID had posed another barrier to meeting up for simple person-to-person exchanges like safety training, giving out supplies, or organizing group cleanups. We decided to evaluate the program from all aspects. So what was the best way to begin? Well, we surveyed the people and looked at the data from our existing volunteers. Who was still active in picking up litter? Why were they continuing? Why had they dropped off? What groups were historically relied on? And how can we connect with our community without having to put them at risk? And we even used the survey to solicit some photos from past cleanups to use in our new tools and marketing. We took this data and combined it with the positives. What are the positives we saw during COVID? Increase in technology use across age groups, reliance on online tools to access resources, and innovative ways to minimize contact. That's when we decided to take advantage of this and go digital, and I looked at many local and faraway examples of citizen engagement. Programs such as Adopt a Storm Drain, Adopt a Road, Adopt a Bus Stop, Adopt a Park, until I found a site that used ArcGIS tools to map, track, and share data with the community, engaging them in real-time activities with hashtags on social media and transparency of litter collection data. With ArcGIS online tools, we built a web app, embedded on the front page of our website to show the adopted areas, as seen in the map here. There's also a real-time stats bar that updates as litter cleanups are being reported. And for a little extra encouragement, we added a commissioner district graph to encourage a little friendly competition. Those are the tools we built for the public. But we have so much more data available to us in the tools we built for our internal managers of the program. So let's take a look. We use 3 main apps. One, to manage features that people want to adopt. A great feature available is to be able to visualize the terrain in the Adoption Editor application. So our managing staff can look at items like guardrails, speed limits, slopes, any dangerous curves coming up to decide whether this area is adoptable. And this is our manager application. And this application houses dashboards, links, and instructional material on how to use all of these tools, which is useful for any current or future employee to refer to. This is still a work in progress as we test out tools and discover new data we'd like to display. Some of the data we have displayed in the manager tools is bar graphs with miles of active adoptions and also the Adopt a Spot requests. In this dashboard, we can see cleanup locations, and we can look at all of the reported data for each cleanup location, and then how much was picked up or how many volunteers were there at any given time. Inside the manager tool, it functions a little like a website where you can navigate to different pages and then manage different workflows. For instance, when you navigate to the cleanup reports, you can look at any reports that require action. Sometimes that includes heavy things or additional assistance, maybe some hazardous materials. And here you can also see if there was an accident report and go directly to any uploaded accident reports. And then we also manage workflows through the supply request form. And here we can see who's requested that, when their next event is, and then give us time to get the supplies to them. Everything you see in the data tools comes directly from our volunteers through 3 simple forms: sign-up form, cleanup report form, and supply request form. The only information our staff puts in are the number of miles for each spot adopted and when the adoption starts and begins. They transfer a few items of data like their name and contact information when they map a location. It's important to note from these 3 surveys mentioned earlier, we have the capability to build future dashboards in ArcGIS if we wanted to pull data on other trends, such as accidents, hazardous or heavy materials that were reported to identify illegal dumping trends, but we also use SeeClickFix currently, where anyone in the community can report illegal dumping or litter, and those mapped layers are also compatible with the GIS tools where data can be pulled from. We had 2 goals in mind when starting this project: digital, simple data collection, and boosting community involvement. It was observed that at the same time a great technology shift was happening, we were finding a disconnection with community, and people were longing to get outside and explore. They were beginning to notice the litter piling up in our public spaces. People care about improving parks, beaches, and trails too, where community events often take place. So our program now includes public spaces rather than just roads as it had been branded before. With things opening up and people still struggling to find community, our next steps will be to engage and promote the program. We'll do this through visibility on social media posts, bulletins, local articles, etc. We're also actively present at group events, taking photos, thanking volunteers in person and virtually. We're in the process of designing signs for placement around the community for awareness of adopted spaces and recognition, and we'll also be placing them where we want to expand with a message of available for adoption. One final note, we are always looking to expand ways to visualize data. So if you use ArcGIS tools currently to map or collect data, I'd love to hear from you on what maps and layers you have available to share, especially at the state and federal level, so that we can create more visual context and experiences for the public centered on litter and pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Much appreciated. Super interesting too to think about the litter aspect in the wake of COVID. I know there was a lot of information going around right when the pandemic started, insofar as kind of is it transferable through materials, and that was something we grappled with over in Tacoma too. So good to see that Kitsap was able to kind of overcome those barriers and do some really good work. So thank you, Christy, for sharing. We'll move on to our next speaker. I did want to remind folks too, I am watching the chat, so feel free if you do have questions for any of our speakers and panelists today, feel free to put those in the chat and I will try to sift through those once the Q&A time comes up, or we'll have an opportunity for you to just voice those questions as well. So next up, Randy Hartman from Keep America Beautiful. Randy, good to see you. I know that you were worried about some travel issues, but I'm glad to have you on board today. And I think you're going to be talking with us about some national litter reduction efforts and kind of highlighting some successful programs.
Yes, good morning, Preston, and great to be here. Yes, I'm traveling. I just landed in Denver about 30 minutes ago, so glad I could make the presentation. And just really want to thank everybody for including Keep America Beautiful in this effort. What you guys are doing is truly inspirational and on target with exactly what we do as an organization. So I hate to say that most of what is going to be talked about in my presentation is going to be repetitive, but hopefully it will kind of frame what you're doing in the great state of Washington, also across the country, and what others are doing. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the national research. I know many of you have referenced the 2020 study. Also going to put that in context to about a decade ago and how things have changed and what kind of progress is being made and where some of the trends are. And then talk a little bit about our methodology and programming. At the end of the day, Keep America Beautiful, like all of you, we want to prevent litter. We don't want to be a cleanup organization. Cleanups are critical in order to prevent litter, and it's that foundational step. But we really want to move the needle and get into prevention. And our great friends at Cascadia were instrumental in doing the 2020 research. So I'm going to just breeze through that pretty quickly and just share a little bit about also, who we are at Keep America Beautiful. I don't think anybody participating in this Litter Summit would disagree. We all want a country in which every community is a clean, green, and beautiful place to live and accessible to all. Just a little bit about Keep America Beautiful, KB. We have 700 local affiliates scattered across the nation. And we also work with a lot of partners. We worked with some of you in Washington State to do litter cleanups and implement some of the programming that we have. Not to repeat, but this looks probably pretty familiar to what you saw in the 2022 Washington State Litter Study. We actually did a public attitude survey to kind of frame the context of Americans' perceptions about litter. Then we did a litter assessment where we actually counted litter. We didn't convert that to weight. or volume. It was a road count and a waterway count. For the first time ever, we actually counted litter along waterways as well. And then we looked at some non-roadway places, and we're currently looking at the cost of litter in communities. 85 different material categories, 85 different product categories, 6 different material groups. We looked at that along roadsides and waterways, as I indicated, and like the Washington State study, that was broken down into various road segments and types, and waterway types as well. Not surprising, 9 out of 10 Americans identify litter as a problem in their state. What you do is essential to supporting and aligning to what people are looking for. Respondents identified motorists and pedestrians as the primary source of litter, indicating fast food packaging, beverage containers, plastic bags, tobacco products as the most littered items. Unfortunately, we were able to extrapolate and identify 50 billion pieces of litter along US roadways and waterways at any given day in this country. And more of that actually being found along our waterways than roadways. That's about 2,000 pieces of litter per mile. And the majority of that litter is small. I think one of your presenters talked about that yesterday. 9 out of 10 littered items are 4 inches or less. The good news is compared to our 2009 study, that represents a 54% decrease in litter along our roadways. What is the cause of that? Cause and effect, we know we have better stormwater systems. Obviously, we're finding a lot of litter along our waterways as well. Materials are more lightweighted than they were a decade ago. Some of those things could also be contributing to the decrease in litter along our roadways, but still significant litter in our communities. Litter reduction occurred in most categories. The good news is cigarette butts, fast food, and soft drink containers saw the largest decreases, and that's even accounting for some of the decreases in smoking rates and increases in population. Unfortunately, plastics, again, no surprise here, have grown in the last decade, now accounting for almost half of the litter in our communities. And as we all know, plastics do not go away. They do not biodegrade. If somebody doesn't pick them up, they're only going to degrade and get smaller and smaller and enter our waterways. The study was actually done in 2020 during COVID. And it was an opportunity to see what happens when new materials get introduced to the mainstream. Unfortunately, we did see a lot of PPE being littered along our waterways and roadways. Again, just a breakdown by material type. We all know the stats by 2050. By weight, there's going to be more plastics in our ocean than fish if we don't do something to change that. Again, differences in makeup between waterway and roadway. Not going to go into this, just want you to know that that information is out there for your use. This breaks it down even by the road type and the water type. Obviously, our larger freeway systems and waterway systems, rivers, account for less miles. But that's actually where a lot of our litter gets concentrated. So as we're targeting where to pick up litter in our communities, this can be helpful as to where to look as well. I think it's, again, mentioned several times throughout the presentations here, cigarette butts are still the #1 littered item. But some of the other plastics are getting inching up and getting very close to becoming the #1 littered item as well. So, don't sweat the small stuff, just pick it up. 9 out of 10 items are 4 inches or less. 40% of these items are from plastic. And again, we all know the importance of picking up those plastic items. If you look at the top 10 items of items that are 4 inches or less, again, cigarette butts is at the top of the list. but you can also see that there's also a lot of other plastic items as well. It accounts to about 134 pieces per person in the country. We also did look at the differences that some statewide policies make. We know that states that have deposit containers or deposits on containers have 50% less litter of those those items that have the deposits on them. And what is really telling is 30% less overall litter in those states with bottle bills. The top 10 items along our roadway, again, are here. It counts for 80% of all roadway litter are found in those top 10 items. Cigarette butts and other plastics topping the chart. Waterway, it actually flips. Other plastic and cigarette butts top the top 10 items, and it represents 76% of the items littered. There is a difference if you start looking at what's littered along waterways and roadways. The types of items are different, and it just goes to how we might design collections along waterways versus roadways. And all that is available in study, which is on our website, and you can dive deeper into that. As I indicated, we also looked at non-roadway and waterway places and looked to see what materials were being littered. And I'm just highlighting the cigarette butts here because I'm going to be talking a little bit about an effective program that we've been rolling out across the country that actually shows a 50% reduction in littering of cigarette butts. But areas to target, obviously retail shopping, mass transit centers, and storm drains are all areas where we found a high level of cigarette butts being littered. So one of the things that we would like to do is just kind of imagine a cleanup that will be the last cleanup ever needed. I think all of us, all our volunteers would just celebrate that day. So what does that look like? How do we get there? How do we prevent litter? How do we stop from having to clean it up? Well, one of the things that Keep America Beautiful relies upon is this model for change, and it's based on behavioral change. And it starts first by engaging individuals, engaging the people, and identifying the outcomes that they want. It's based on having facts. It's scientifically based. So that's why the importance of the litter study, so that we know what's being littered, we know where it's being littered, we know the impact that it's having in our community. Then we want to prioritize the behaviors in terms of waste reduction, substitution, recycling. How can we prevent those materials from being littered? How can we make that into, as has been mentioned already, those positive messaging? We know those are much more effective than the don't litter signs. Actually, a sign saying don't litter almost gives permission for people to litter. So we find the positive messaging is more effective in terms of preventing litter. And then, as we implement these programs, and you guys all have that as part of your programming, is reporting back to the volunteers, reporting back to the community about the impact of what you're doing and how that's making a difference in their community, in their neighborhood, and why it's important not to litter. So one of the things that we did is launched a cigarette litter prevention program. And again, the steps here, who needed to be at the table, how are we going to talk about that, where were the cleanups going to be taking place, who, what volunteers, what is the role of the volunteers? It's not only picking up the litter, but it's about education. It's about sharing that messaging with their social network and peers and friends, again, to carry that message throughout the community. And then, try to envision what would a 4-inch and less litter cleanup look like. And I was very encouraged, to hear our friends from Green Blue talking about packaging and how do we change our packaging to make sure that the bottle caps don't leave the container. Maybe instead of the tear packaging that, we only tear it part way so that it stays intact. so that it doesn't become littered. I think these are all positive things in terms of messaging and prevention that we can all start trying to incorporate into our programming. And that's in part then how we establish a cultural norm. Many of you will remember Keep America Beautiful for the Iron Eyes Cody commercial, the Native American, who was portrayed by an Italian actor. What that commercial did for me, that public service commercial did for me, was really galvanize the nation around a cultural ethic about caring for the land and not littering. So, how do we get back to that kind of shared cultural value and ethic that really goes across all the diversity that we have in our nation today? We also know, and this has been talked about as well in your programming, education alone won't do it. Signs alone won't do it. We have to have the infrastructure, right? And there was talk about, having not only having that infrastructure, but having it in the right place, making sure that everybody had access to it. And then how do you measure the results? A lot of that was being provided, and then the incentives to encourage reporting. So the cigarette litter prevention program, real quickly, because cigarette litter is the #1 littered item. It's a program there. We provide funding to communities to do, our affiliate network, as well as other local governments, NGOs. We ask them to involve the community, identify a target area, do a pre-assessment where they count the amount of cigarette litter. They implement a program in terms of messaging, infrastructure. They monitor and measure the results midstream and a post-assessment. And through that program, we've seen cigarette litter being reduced by upwards of 50 to 80%. We did a transitional point study. We know that, again, policies do affect litter. If you have smoking bans, where that smoking ban takes effect, you'll find more cigarette litter. And what we're finding is property owners will blow the cigarette butts to their property line or to various parts of their property, but not pick up the litter. So we've actually created a model ordinance that requires the property owners to pick up the cigarette litter and not just blow it away. That's all available on our website. And then our cigarette litter prevention program going in the future. One of the things we want to do with our cigarette stands, which are noted in the far right-hand corner, we provide those free to communities. If you scan the QR code there, you can go online, fill out an application, and we will send you those stands to place in your community. We want to put sensors in those stands so that when they start filling up and they're serviced by volunteers are only going out and servicing when it's needed. The only requirement we have to get those free stands is that you do have to take the step to recycle those. We have partnered with TerraCycle to actually recycle the cigarette butts that are collected and turn it into things like park benches. So with that, that concludes my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Randy. Much appreciated. And thank you for kind of zooming us out to look at kind of national efforts and national perspective, but a lot of similarities we saw. So, and teeing up the conversation very nicely for our next speaker, Heather Trem, Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington, who's going to discuss a little bit about legislation and policy solutions, including models from other states. So Heather, I will pass it on to you. And thanks. Keep the chat going. Lots of good suggestions, thoughts in the chat. Please check that out. Capturing questions. So we'll get to that after Heather's presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Preston, and the other speakers. It's been really interesting. So Zero Waste Washington is a statewide nonprofit. Many of you may be familiar with us. Our goal is to make trash obsolete. We primarily work to help pass laws, do research projects, and do pilot projects. And let's see if it's going to work. Today, I'm going to talk about basically a policy menu, and I would love to talk a lot more about each item. It's going to be very quick on each item, but if you come to the discussion group later on policy, you might want to be able to sort of share some ideas. So I'm going to talk about prevention, then reduction and enforcement, and then funding. Everything, of course, overlaps. So let's start with prevention. So there is a coalition that many of you may already know about, Plastic Free Washington, Washington Sin Plastico. coalition, and the groups that are leading this are along the bottom here. And the goal is to address our plastic pollution and our recycling crisis by reducing unnecessary plastics and then building markets and restoring our recycling system, creating jobs in Washington. So to that end, a couple of years ago, in 2020, Senator Doss led the charge along with Rep. Peterson to get a very strong bag bill passed in Washington, and this kicked in on October 1. So this is key prevention when we can get rid of the problematic plastics that blow around and cause a lot of the litter. Then in 2021, Senator Doss led, as with Rep. Liz Berry in the House, on 5022, and 5022 had many components, but some of the components directly relate also to preventing the litter in the first place, preventing the material. The first is banning expanded polystyrene or styrofoam, more commonly known, food service products, coolers, and peanuts. The dates that these are going to kick in occur over the next 2 years. You can see the dates here on this slide, but these, particularly styrofoam, really blows around and gets, we find a lot of this in the litter cleanups. Of course, we also have a problem with docks, and we'll be thinking about that for next year as well. Another component of 5022, and this kicked in on January 1, just now in 2022, is that food establishments now need to ascertain that people want cutlery, straws, cold beverage lids, and condiment packs before they give them to people. And they can also put them out on bins, like buckets on the counter, if you want to grab your straw. The idea is not to not have the items, but more to reduce so that people just don't get things they don't want, and thus have less of these single-use plastics that end up getting into our system and also getting out into the environment. Now, the biggie, which has been worked on for the past few years, is the RENEW Act. Representative Liz Berry is going to be speaking with closing comments today, is the champion on this bill. And the idea is an extended producer responsibility where the manufacturers pay for the end of life of packaging and printed products. This is not a new idea. These type of programs have been in place around the world, in particular in Europe, since the early 1990s. Everything on this map that is colored, not gray, is an area where we have some level of an extended producer responsibility, which is nicknamed EPR, program for packaging, in place. And you'll see the United States is still gray. However, in the last 2 years, we've had some action. So shown in yellow are the states where bills have been introduced, and in purple are Maine and Oregon, which passed laws last year, and in blue, Colorado and California, which have just passed laws just in the past few months. So of course, we would like to have Washington join the crowd. What it is, and this is just so high level of what is a complicated bill, but it is basically to create a circular economy where the producers, and you can see the producers in the light green box, and then you can see a bunch of the brands that we're talking about when we're talking about producers, are part of the system that they help pay for the end of life of the materials. But it's the idea is that we would actually have better design of materials so that they are more easy to recycle, they have less material in them, and are processed, collected and processed. We have uniform across the state, and that we can have waste prevention and responsible recycling. That gets to the issues of toxics and social justice. So it's a very complicated big bill, and it will be coming back next year to the Washington legislature. The number SB 5697 is from this past year. Now, a very large part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to move to reuse and refill. So here are two really great examples. On the left is Vessel, which is where they do a lot of coffee cups and things like that. Notice they're stainless steel. And restaurants, you can get your coffee or your drinks, then you return your reusable container to a kiosk or back to the restaurant. It gets washed and then used for the next customer. And the one on the right is called Foreverware, which is, I believe, in Minnesota. So these reuse systems is the way we really want to go to reduce single-use plastics, which get out in the environment and also gung up essentially our recycling system. Let's see, this is not advancing. Now, the other thing we really want to do is get back to the future in terms of refill systems. On the left, you can see Coke. Coke is already saying in Europe that they're going to be going to reusable Coke bottles again, reuse them up to say 17 times or even more. And in Oregon, Portland, they already have a beer for the local beer brewers. They have a system where they all use a standard bottle. They put their own label on it, and then it gets refilled. And I think they're up to about 20 refills per glass bottle. And then they get recycled, of course. Now, another aspect of bringing your own container, again, just to reduce the amount of single-use plastics out there, is is this new regulation. It's the food safety regulations with the State Department of Health. This kicked in on March 1st, 2022. And now if a grocer or a restaurant has a contamination-free plan in place, consumers can bring their own container to get food. It was actually illegal up until March 1st of 2022. So this is a new thing, same thing for beverages. And another really big area of interest is bottle bills. So there are 10 states that are colored here in blue that have existing bottle bills in place where consumers pay a deposit when they purchase the beverage containers, and then they get that money back at the end. Now, Randy mentioned this, and I'm actually showing now the data from the Keep America Beautiful report from 2020, showing the number of, if you look at the bottom, just look at the thing that's circled in red, it's the number of beverage containers, the things that are covered by the bottle laws that were picked up when they did the cleanups. And you can see that it's double the number, so it's 8, and this is just in their sampling area, so you can imagine, you can extrapolate this out by many numbers, but it's double the amount of material that is found in non-bottle bill states versus the bottle states. This is basically, bottle bills have been shown to make a big difference in terms of reducing litter. Now, some of you are my age and you will remember these. Some of you are young and will not remember these, but this actually, I looked it up last night. This technology was developed in 1960 and became pretty widespread by 1963 around the world. When you got your sodas or your beers, you had these pull tabs. Well, that was a major source of litter in the 1960s and 70s. And then what happened is they switched to the kind you have now, where it's actually tethered to the can. Well, that's where we're headed now. Olga mentioned this yesterday, that we are now getting to the point where the bottles that have a plastic cap can be tethered. And the article on the right is about the United Kingdom program that has been is in place now by Coke and their brands. So we need this in the United States. And then the other thing that Olga mentioned yesterday is all those little pull-off strips. So when you open a package and you pull off the little thing, and then you have that little loose piece, that's something we could redesign out. And but what she mentioned, which is very important, is that it may be a policy shift that's going to be needed to get the manufacturers to move towards these tethered lids and redesign their products so you don't have all these little pieces that become litter and also gung up the recycling system. Another big area of complaint that I get all the time when I give talks about this stuff is veggie stickers, produce stickers. And there are really good solutions and that are coming online. We tried to get this into the organics bill last session, 1799. It was pretty quickly taken out of the bill. There was a lot of complaints, but I think we are moving in this direction. I definitely think we need to do this because it's messing up our compost, but it also just becomes part of our sort of little pieces litter problem. So on the left, you have the current status, which is plastic stickers on an awful lot of our produce. Well, the number one thing we can do, if you look at the top middle photo there, is like not have stickers. How about that? Which you do see in some groceries. Then on the right top is compostable stickers that are compostable. The sticker itself is compostable and the adhesive is compostable. And these are now coming online. The lemons, that is a tattoo, a laser tattoo that can be done, and they're experimenting around with that in Europe. And then finally, on the right is a paper wrapper around the bananas, so that could be recycled. Granted, we really want none of these, and we really want the one that would be the none of the above, but unfortunately some of the scanners are needed for the grocers, and they need that barcode on there somehow or other. And they also need to identify where there's a law that says you have to identify where the produce is from. Another major thing we can do to reduce single-use bottles is to get refill stations in everywhere. These are examples that we worked on, funded by Seattle Public Utilities. These were religious institutions, so these all went in earlier this year, replacing water fountains with refill stations. And so we're looking at potentially thinking about that for the entire state for all new construction. Everywhere where a refill station, a fountain is required, that it should be a refill station. As was discussed just now, in fact, pretty much by everybody, cigarette butts is one of the #1 things you find. So in California, they have a bill that is, I don't believe, making it this year, to prohibit the filters, because it is the filter that is plastic, and that is what you get remnant of when you do, like, for example, beach cleanups. And here, you still have the paper on them, but they do have that plastic filter inside. So we are very interested at some point in looking at a law to prohibit filters. They have been shown not to improve health. That was what they were sold on to the public, but in fact, there's studies that have shown that they don't improve health. And then, as Randy just mentioned, so what happens is we have a law that you can't smoke within 25 feet of the entrance. And so what happens is about 25 feet away from all these restaurants and bars and other retailers and office buildings, you have all these folks who are smoking. And then basically you see clusters of cigarette butts on the ground in those locations. And so what can we do to address that? And Randy mentioned in what model ordinance they have. Another thing you could do is required that you have little bins, cigarette bins, to pick them up in those locations as well. All right, let's turn to reduction and enforcement. #1 issue here is that we right now in Washington have kind of a weak law in terms of the fines that are required if you litter in Washington. So if you are doing your first infraction, and it's not very much, and it's on the highway, our infraction is $231. And if you litter elsewhere, not on the highway, it's $103. So this is, well, I'm just right now looking at first infraction. So now look at this. If you cross the border into Oregon, this is what you see. And they have the signs everywhere. And I'm like, whoa. Wow, that is fabulous. That really sends a message. And here I cherry picked. So this is not, this is cherry picked map here, but looking at the dollar fines and in some cases required litter cleanup programs in different states. And you can see that we, among the ones I've cherry picked, are low. There are some states that are lower than us, but they're not that many that are lower than us. Most are higher, and these are the ones that are the really strong ones. So just to give you an idea of what we could be doing on our first infraction of litter, that it's all different when it gets into other things. And by the way, I didn't include the states that actually can offer jail time for that first infraction. That was going to make this map way too busy. Now, we also have Secure Your Load, which Amber talked quite a bit about. And in the state, if you're driving, there's a ticket of $231. And then, and there's been a huge campaign that Amber has helped lead up with others. And a lot of local jurisdictions have worked on this. It can be up to $5,000 if someone is injured or something is injured. Now, she mentioned yesterday that at the local transfer stations, each county or each location is required to have an ordinance that has a fee associated. So I just last night looked up some examples, and you can see that they're all kind of in the same realm of dollar amounts. They're not huge dollar amounts. And I do think that there could be some positive and negatives if you go higher with these fees, but we do really need to get people to secure their loads. King County has this really terrific set of imagery to really show, if you look at the top row, what is not securing your load. And then, of course, they have the very scary photo of the plywood on the lower one. Anyway, and the sofa in the middle of the highway. But bottom line is, this is a major issue for health, but also for, for human safety, but also a lot of litter is from unsecured loads.
About 3 minutes left, Heather.
So 3 minutes, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. We didn't talk this much in the conference this year about illegal dumping. The conferences that have been occurring in California for the past couple of years that are online have really been focused on illegal dumping, which is a major problem as well. And it's a problem here. Here's an example from Oakland, the city of Oakland, that Waste Management has been doing to help reduce illegal dumping. They restructured, the top thing is they compressed their rates. They restructured their rate, or the cost, for 64 and 96 gallon bins, so that they're actually the same cost as each other and much less than the previous rates. What they had was a lot of families getting bins that were smaller than they needed, but it was what they could afford, and so they had a lot of overflow from the bins, and having the material go into recycle or in organic bins, or just not working out very well. So this has been a very big success for them to restructure their rate. I think we need to look at this. The other thing they did is they added additional bulky service for free. It is not free around here, from what I can tell. So all residents, single family and multifamily, can have curbside pickup of bulky. And they have increased how much people can pick up. I'll show you that photo in a minute. And tenants, so they don't have to go through their landlord. A tenant can schedule an appointment for a bulky item, and they have really seen very big improvement of less of bulky items being picked up. So here's their website showing that that they're promoting this, and that people can schedule their bulky pickup. And then here is what their amount is. It's up to 4 cubic yards. So if you see the imagery there with the 3 by 12 by 3 foot, that is essentially 4 cubic yards. And they explain what you can pick up for free through their program. Now, another area, and this could be a whole talk, is what can we do with related to water quality? First off, I think we need to strengthen the language in our stormwater permits, which are the NPDES permits. And then also, we are working with EPA to try, and all of you and all the groups that are doing cleanup, we really would like to do the ETAP, which is the Escaped Trash Assessment Protocol, at a lot of locations, so that we can really look and create a data set to look at where we have impaired water bodies. In other words, areas that are polluted due to litter under the Federal Clean Water Act. A whole talk in and of itself. All right, real briefly, funding. So we heard about social marketing. You're going to hear a wonderful keynote from Nancy shortly, Nancy Lee, about social marketing. I have done decades of work on outreach, and I can tell you that social marketing, where you do the research to figure out what motivates people to make the change, is something that really is way more effective than just doing more signs and flyers. Now, California has a microplastic strategy. I think we need to do this here in Washington State. And then what we do have, though, is that NOAA, and I think Andrew Mason is here today, NOAA has a terrific effort that they've done, which is an action plan. They've collaborated with 50 different organizations. It has 4 goals in it. It's very detailed, and we need more funding for all those actions in there. But it's been a really great way for all the organizations, agencies, and others to work together to really tackle marine debris, which a lot of it, of course, as you know, is coming from the land. And can't not talk about funding. So we need more money to do all the things that we've talked about. Right now, it's coming from the litter tax and a few other state funding programs. It's coming from the ratepayers. We need it from the producers. And are there other dedicated funds that we can get in place? This is to pay for everything that we want to do. So in sum, we really want to make it easier to not litter. And so we have prevention strategies, which is banning things, producer responsibility, the Renew Act, getting more reuse and refill stations, and bring your own container and refill fountains all over the place, and potentially a bottle bill. We need to look at really maybe hefting up some of our enforcement fines and fees. Look at our waste contracts in terms of some of the illegal dumping implications and maybe litter implications, and looking a little bit more closely at our water quality regs, how we can up those. And then, of course, with funding, it costs to do a social marketing project You need to do the basic foundational research. That costs at least $360,000, $350,000. We need money for education. We need great campaigns on messaging, which Ecology is starting to lead up. We need funding for the encampment programs we heard about yesterday, the work programs, hiring unhoused people to do the work programs, purple bag programs, more money for cleanups and by agencies and NGOs, and then these coordinated plans, getting them funded. And what else? What other ideas do you all have? And I will stop right there. And in our discussion, we'll have Q&A right now, and then there'll be a breakout group on policy that you can come and share more ideas as well.
Thank you, Heather. Much appreciated. I want to commend all of the panelists and speakers today with this group on their great time management. We do have about 12 minutes left for questions, and I've been compiling some, so I'll go ahead and start us off. And this question is going to be for Christy. Amber asks, first off, wonderful job, Kitsap County. What's the cost of setting up a new system like this? And so far as FTEs, hours, was there any kind of training involved with using the tools? Can you just kind of talk about the background for that?
Yes, so it's just one of the projects I worked on. I'm a full-time FTE. After we got through this and lost our corrections pickup, we now have 2 people doing running it and managing the program. So that's 2 full-time FTEs. We used to only have 1 full-time FTE, but this is only a portion of what they do. They also work with on the illegal dumping piece. As far as hours, we did have to pull in an ArcGIS analyst to do some of the more advanced coding. We already have a GIS group in our IS and in other public works, but we didn't have a position in solid waste. So unfortunately, probably for us, it took a little bit longer for me to kind of figure out the tools that I needed to do. But now that I know the tools, they're actually pretty easy to use. So if you have a larger group, like, I would imagine like Seattle or some of the larger groups that already work in GIS, you would have less hours to do. I did not tally because we did not bill it to a project. It was just billed under our full Clean Kitsap umbrella, or it was just part of education and outreach because that's what I just bill everything to. So I can't tell you for that. I will say in the beginning, when I first started with the tools, it took me probably a week of just dedicated time trying to figure out what tools, what apps, all of that. If you have a GIS group though, and they went to the recent Esri conference last week, they're probably just got introduced to all of these tools. I was there and there was just amazing excitement because most of these tools are fairly new applications and people are now using them for communication side. And so you might have some good response from your GIS group if you need to ask for help on this. But building the website, building those surveys, very minimal. I mean, just a couple of days, really. It was more of the research and all of that part of the project that took more time figuring out what we needed to do, what we wanted, who'd do the task. And there was training involved in the manager side. I created trainings for the 2 managers. And that, again, put all those tools on the experience. So it's there in the GIS tools for them to refer to. We did a weekly meeting for the first, I want to say 2 months, just a short 1 to 2 hour meeting. How are things going? Because we did a soft rollout with our existing volunteers. And so that there was that time involved to make sure they understood how to use the tools and access them and, fine tune like any new software program.
Great. Thank you, Christine. I will echo, I think Amkar put something at the very beginning in the chat about how great it is to use these tools for these purposes. And I would just echo that. We've been working on some stuff too. But our GIS department is always in full demand too, Christy. So if you are fortunate to have one, reach out early. So thank you for that reply.
That's why I'm self-taught.
Yeah. Next question is for Randy. I think it's more of a clarification question. When you were referencing other plastics in waterways, was that a lot of plastic bags, or can you talk about kind of what was in that other plastics?
Yeah, so the other plastics is kind of the catch-all category. So it might be too small to identify as a plastic bottle. It's the film plastic. It's again, the general don't know what it is, so it goes into other plastics.
Great, thank you. While I have you, Randy, this may be Randy or Heather, since y'all both kind of talked a little bit about the policy work. Andre asked a little bit about what would it take to create a policy on having reverse vending machines in Washington State. I think what's being referred to is here's the deposit system. So just wanted to hear from y'all.
Yeah, typically reverse vending machines are associated with deposit bills. So, you get the nickel or the dime back when you go to reverse vending. It doesn't have to be. There are cases where the machines are set up to give and donate to a nonprofit. There are other ways to use reverse vending. The machines are not inexpensive, and then you have to have somebody also service those machines.
This is a question for Heather, which I thought was kind of a nuanced question from one of our other panelists. Christy asks, are you aware of any incentives to lower sewer costs when a refill station is installed? Increased water use can increase sewer bills. So it'd be interesting to see if utilities took that data into account.
That is such a good idea, because yes, this would save water if people didn't drink half of it. The other thing about the water faucets, another incentive for it is public health. A colleague was saying the other day that her child drinks out of the water faucet. She's putting her mouth all over the thing. And if you do a refill station with your own bottle, then you wouldn't be putting your mouth all over the thing. So that is such a good idea, Christy. Love it.
And Heather, while I have you, someone asked us, do you know if Oakland and WM have a limit on how often people can have those bulky items picked up?
I should have tried to figure that out last night. I think it's once per year for drop off, but I didn't see the limit for if you schedule it at your home or and if you're a tenant at your home. So I'm not sure that there is a limit, but I did see there was a limit for a drop off. They also, I didn't mention, they also have free, they'll come and help you basically put on a free neighborhood scale collection event. So you could have like a block party kind of thing and have it be part of that too, for even bigger items. Okay. But someone can maybe take a peek at the Oakland website. It might say if there's a limit. I know there's a limit on the drop off once a year. For the, you have to show your license or whatever, your water bill or whatever, to show that you are a resident.
Wonderful. Okay. This one may, I'm curious about this one too. Maybe Bethany or Omkar may have some insights into this, or maybe Ecology. Is there any data on how many tickets are given each year or month for littering?
I can kind of chime in. This is Amber with Ecology. We do track the number of litter and unsecured load citations. We get that information from State Patrol. So we are tracking that, and I do have that data for the last couple of years. In terms of local jurisdictions, I don't have that at the state level because local law enforcement does the same thing.
So Amber, do you know how many were done at the state level? Do you have it handy?
I don't have it handy. Let me dig for it. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Amber. And then we got about 5 minutes left. I thought this was kind of a bigger question for the panel that I think if everybody want to take a minute or two and just kind of summarize. This question was, so everyone in this conference is talking about picking up litter. How do we stop litter? So just feel free to jump in there in a minute or two if each of the panelists want to just talk about that.
Well, I can start. So the first half of my talk was on prevention. And I think her comment came in prior to my talk starting. Bottom line is we absolutely need to do policy changes to reduce the single use in the first place. We need to look at the litter tax in terms of other materials that should be added to it. We need to look at more funding. But, you know, fundamentally, let's make it so that there's just less litter to be put out there. I know, for example, in our cleanups, we see a lot of cannabis packaging, and I know that the cannabis industry is super interested in moving towards, for example, reusable items that can be brought back, like, you know, a little glass tube could be brought back in and then cleaned and reused. That's against the law in Washington right now, but it is legal in Colorado. So there's a lot of, I didn't even get into like other prevention stuff we can do, but you probably, for practically everything you can think of that's a disposable, not a durable, but a disposable, you can probably think of good prevention strategies we could do.
Thanks, Heather. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll chime in from Randy from Keep America Beautiful. I think, you know, it's what you've been talking about here. It's about technology advancement. It's about better packaging. It's about positive messaging, it's establishing that cultural ethic that littering is not acceptable. It's all those things coming together, providing the right infrastructure. How many public spaces are we going to now that don't have trash collection or don't have recycling collection? That also results in more littering. So, those are the things that we have to make sure it's all of that coming together. And that's ultimately what's going to prevent litter.
Christy, Bethany, Amkar, I want to give you some space. Any thoughts on this?
Sure.
Go ahead, Bethany.
Oh, yeah, I really agree with what everyone has been saying. I think policy and infrastructure are key for creating a space for this to be possible. But what I see as a big thing would be the outreach and the communication. I know behavior change is really hard. If you can change one person's behavior, you really have made an impact, even just that one person. So just reaching out, getting people involved in litter cleanups, getting people involved in projects and in ways, just communicating in general with everyone about how this affects them and how this affects the environment and what they can do to help would be really great for stopping litter.
Thanks, Bethany.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Bethany was saying, which is that, the type of program like the Adopt a Spot that we do, or any type of outreach that puts it in the public eye is just backing up what we're already trying to say and creating that culture that it's just not acceptable. And here are all those people, and look, they don't like it. They don't want it. We're celebrating them and their behaviors. We're not celebrating your behavior.
Yeah, I would just echo that, because Mary Rayburn has a question about making it visual. I think that what and Bethany are doing, and what actually Randy, all the other panelists are doing, is a really good thing in terms of making it visible to the public, visible to lawmakers, so they can see we've got to address this problem and tell the story in a way that really makes it, powerful.
A way
And then I see
it's
there's a
not an
question about
unknown place
retailers.
anymore.
If I can just answer that one question
Sure.
about retailers. The Renew Act is going to be about the producers. The producers are the manufacturers, but it also goes down to the retail level. So the Renew Act would be making all of those parties responsible for reducing the waste and then also paying for the end of life.
And for those who may not be monitoring the chat, the question was kind of requiring merchants to be more responsible to recycling the packaging that they sell.
Right.
So yeah. So a lot of interesting stuff. So I just wanted to say we're at time now. We're at 11:30. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel for all of your presentations and answering the questions. A lot of great questions today. And I think we are ready to transition over to Kelsey to talk a little bit about breakout rooms.